Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from Holyoke, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and the creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Camus. He offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. Now you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
Yes, and this is very easy to see on the third level canal, so that's part of that tour.
And today he'll be educating us on the chemical paper mill. So tell us of the early history of the chemical paper mill.
Okay, this is one of the Newton brothers' creations. They were a family that had come to Holyoke to make good of the power in the canal system. And especially the James Newton was the one that would run this mill. Daniel Newton, his brother, was the one that built up the mill. Moses Newton, another one of his brothers, was the treasurer here. And so you could see, and there was also John Newton, who was a helper in the building. Now, the chemical paper company, well, they specialized. And if you call it chemical, right away you know, oh, they're basing upon the production by chemically using a lot of chemicals in the production. Instead of using cotton pulp or paper tree pulp, they must have been using something else. All right, now, so I'm going to tell you along the way sort of products they made and how the production was at the mill, and then what it became in the mills and what is happening in the mills right now. And this is a very important company. This was the Newton Brothers' Keystone project, and they got very rich by doing this. So the early history is starting in 1880. They started up this mill, and they made a lot of products, and they also developed them from scratch. But one thing you'll recognize that all of their products in this mill are very, very heavy-duty paper products, such as cardboard, such as boxes, such as papeteers, which is holder of papers, which is box and hold papers, such as large paper products, such as the lining you find in new carpets, such as tar paper, right? Heavy-duty paper, Bristol paper, index paper, really, really strong paper. Not the paper you write with, but rather the paper that you store things in, that you protect things with, right? And they made it of all kinds because it was all uses. And believe it or not, if you bought some really fine clothes back then, you wanted to have it wrapped in paper for protection. And the best clothes, they used silk wrapping, and this silk wrapping was made by the chemical paper company. So they did a lot to try to get the best paper company going for heavy duty paper, and it worked. Right, they became rich, and this was only one of their many, many, many paper mills around.
So what other products did they make?
Okay, so we're going to talk about the products, and they're enormously. Papeteers is a box that stores writing paper. You don't find them much around anymore. They also made envelopes, especially heavy-duty manila envelopes and bonded envelopes, which is also heavy-duty. And they made Bristol board cards. They made index cards, folders out of paper. They've also made very heavy-duty linen-based paper, and such as boxes that were made out of strong cotton products. And people would store things in there, where they would ship using these kind of boxes. Right, and the brothers would get patents for all their things. They must have had hundreds of patents coming out of this one chemical paper mill. And they also had coated boxes where you can have a box but have it lined with a different kind of material so that it would store better or look better. So if you had a box on your table that held playing cards, maybe you want that box to have a very fancy outside and inside, and they did that. And then they had all different colors of boxes. You know, fancy uses, you may need a nice box. A box that was going to hold a very ordinary item, sure, you can have those kind of boxes. But they also specialized and made as much specialty as possible. They had different fibers, wool, silk, cotton lined paper, different colors on the dies. So you can buy a fancy box that was made of silk but dyed blue. And they were great for doing that. And they changed with the years. Sure, they started in 1880, that chemical paper company. And it wasn't Newton's first business at all. It was one of the last they ever made. But they changed with the years, and they changed into making all kinds of products, um, different onion skin kind, different boxes with different segments to it. So you can look into it. It's a fancy box. So it might have 8 segments to it, and you might want to store like your knit materials, your sewing material, your utensils, right? Every kind of storage you need, they did. Every color you would need, they did. And they did it all in a very unique way. They developed certain chemicals that would help make the boxes break down from its normal material and then build it up into these fancy uses. So a lot was going on here. It was a big plan.
Check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. In there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you're interested in setting up your private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And they're perfect for fun and educational outdoor activities for the whole family or for your group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. And they are also good just for getting outdoors for the day. What was production like at Camille?
Okay, since it was heavy production and since it was chemical-based production, it was only a 2-floor mill. Most paper mills in Holyoke were 3 or 4, and they'd have the production start on the top floor and come down. But they were chemically based. Sure, the power was based upon power being used from the third level canal going through its races into its turbines into the Connecticut River. But since it was chemically based to produce that paper, and it was dyeing materials, and it was all heavy paper, cardboard, storage boxes, so forth. You couldn't make the production like the rest of Holyoke, have the start at the top and come downwards, because everything was very heavy, and production was made chemically based. So most of the upper floors were used backwards from most of the floors in Holyoke. The upper floors were used to finish off the product. So they'd have the product made in the first floor, and then bring it up to the second floor, which is the top floor. And then there, you'd make the actual box, color it, you'd make the fancy fabric on the outside, you put it into storage bins, and then bring it out to the trains and ship across the country. So that's what most of it was like. It was an enormous, long mill, but very low, 1 or 2 stories along the way. The chemical production happened as you look into it towards the right. The actual putting together the materials into boxes and so forth, that happened towards the left. And of course, they changed with the years, since they had to. When people changed their idea of what they needed in the world, the chemical paper company also changed. You didn't need to have as many fancy boxes. The homes from the 1880s to about the 19-teens loved having fancy items inside of it. But from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, the homes became more practical. And so you didn't need as many papeteers. You didn't need many fiber boxes, right? So you can change what you did. One thing that really didn't change much is that as you look in towards the mill, the right side stayed the same. That's where a lot of production happened. But a lot of the finishing of products, a lot of the cutting, shaping, dyeing, that happened again towards the left. Now, in both cases, the power engine rooms were in the very back. So water was brought in horizontally and then dropped on top of the turbines, and that happened in engine rooms towards the back. And since it was a chemical process also, that was towards the back, but right in front of the turbines, so in a room in front of them, and there you'd have the beaters. You're trying to make that heavy-duty cardboard. It was an incredible process. And when you think about it and what they did for the community, it's amazing that they could have done all that. The United States is still the #1 maker of cardboard boxes in the world and the fancy boxes in the world. No other country in the world can make as much and as tough a box as the United States can do. And where are they made? They're still mostly made in Massachusetts. And you probably know Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots. A lot of his money was made out of his Kraft company, which was making boxes in Massachusetts. All right, now even through the years, towards the end of their production, and I think they went out of business sometime in the 60s, they were still doing a lot of it in the original way. And you can probably say that their production line was different. In Holyoke, most paper mills and fiber mills went 4th floor, 3rd floor, 2nd floor, 1st floor finished. They went basically backwards. They went one-story buildings over most of it, and the production started in the back and came forwards. So you needed railroad tracks in the back, and you needed railroad tracks in the front. The back ones to drop off the products, the front one to take up the finished products. So it's a little backwards, and probably the only backwards paper mill in Holyoke.
So what has the mill become?
Okay, if you look at it nowadays, it's small businesses are in there. Hazen Paper is in there. They have a framer in there that frames photographs. They have a lot of little tiny mills, little tiny retail sections. And there's one bigger section that is part of Sunoco, but Sunoco also takes up other mills. So a lot of small things, and a lot of the businesses are the original ones. You say, whoa, they're small, they're only 1 floor high, but that's the way they always were. And they mostly go backwards, and so if you ever can get in there on Berkshire Street and walk towards the back, you see it's a long mill across, and it has some depth to it, but it doesn't have much height to it at all. And I've told you why along the way. Thank you for listening to the podcast.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can also tune into a large selection of other podcasts and more at his website. Again, that is holyokecanaltour.org. And again, you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from Chicopee, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Coon. He offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. Now you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
That's right, and this is on the 3rd level canal tour.
And so today he'll be talking about the Newton paper mill. So tell us of the early history of the Newton paper mill.
It was made by one of the Newton brothers that came to Holyoke in order to make money. They made a lot of money up north in Greenfield in Vermont, and they came down here to make production mills of usually paper. And the Newton brother that made this mill was Moses Newton himself. He was a brother that joined in with other brother in some joint venture, but never had his own mill going. And so he apparently wanted his own going. And so what he did was start up the Newton paper mill. And it didn't make paper to write on. It made paper in the sense that it was mostly cardboard, specialized cardboard. And what kind? Well, the chemical paper company run by Daniel Newton and James Newton, his brothers, was making specialty cardboards to store nice items in. But he made a lot of cardboard to roll up items into. For instance, a carpet. When you roll up a new carpet, you want to have the bottom layer separated from the top layer as you roll it, and so you have carpet rolling paper. Now, he didn't just make it normal brown, lightweight paper. He also made it different sizes, different colors. But most especially, he made it corrugated, which means that it was cushioned by the cardboard itself. So it had sections in it that would that would give it 2 levels. And he also made other products at his big mill, including paper to wrap around copper wire and then put plastic around it, rubber around it, and you have electric wire. So he made the paper that you might find wrapped around copper. And he did also a lot of wrapping paper. I mean, and quite literally, the paper that gets wrapped around any item, whether it's in a store when they're wrapping the paper, wrapping up your food to be put into bags for you, or it's wrapping paper that's how you make a gift. Any kind of paper that could be used to wrap items up, he came up with ideas to make it. And so he made a lot of them, and he made them under his own brands. He had made a metal brand, for instance, and he's changed his mill around. The early history includes he started his mill in 1873, and this year, 2023, it's 150th anniversary. And 10 years after he made it, the mill about halfway burned to the ground. So in the year 1883, he was rebuilding a lot of his mills. And by 1900 or up to 1910, he redid his system so that he doubled in size. So he already had mill 1 and 2 nearby by the 1880s, but he doubled all the production buildings around those 2 core mills. And so he made things bigger. So we're going to cover is what he did, what happened for production at which station, and then what has become of the many buildings.
And what was production like at this mill?
Okay, production was the following. You had the storage sites in front of the mill. So the water for water power was coming from the third level canal and going to the Connecticut River. So he kept his tunnels carrying this water horizontal until it got to the very back of the mills. And there you had the engine room. And that one big engine room had next to it a lot of gears and pulleys and belts, and they provide energy for all these back mills that did production. There was in the front a lot of storage, and the reason why is because he went through so much paper. This was not the highest quality paper. He didn't have to treat it to turn it white or to make it stronger. He just had to get paper that wrapped very well or that was corrugated. So it was actually a simple production method. But since you're doing so much paper, you need a lot of a storage area for the original product and for the end product until it's ready to ship out. And so he had 4 and then 2 more buildings, 6 buildings just for storage of materials in or out. And towards the back he had rooms where he had 2 Fourdrinier machines. These are the machines that actually can mass produce paper. And he had 2 large ones because he was doing such a vast volume of paper in these specialty products. And then towards the side he had beaters. Then he had places where they could assemble these things. And it didn't take that many workers because it was, in no sense of the word, a very complex process. It was just a lot of volume to go through. And so he made his plant bigger and bigger through the years, and that's what's key because a lot of plants stayed about the same size, and he just kept expanding.
And so quickly before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can do so by checking out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you're interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun educational outdoor activities for the whole family or for your group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. And they are also good just for getting outdoors for the day. So getting back to our interview, what did they make at the Newton Mill?
Okay, the products they made, I covered some of them along the way. You got to remember there was a wire factory in Holyoke called the Prentice Wire Company. and they wouldn't need paper except when they're making copper wire and they wanted to make electrical cables out of it. So they need a layer of paper. In fact, in the early days, that was it. It was layered with paper and there was no rubber around it. But then later in time, they put rubber around it. So the Newton paper mill was great because they made rolled up paper for even safety production like this. Now, other things that they made at the mill included any rolled product. So they made rolled up cylinders used for shipping, and they made rolled up products used for storage, including, think of this one, hat boxes, right? So that was key. They made lots of hat boxes, and they made lots of rolled up products for shipping. And you think in the old days, how did you get wine bottles shipped to the customer when they're very fragile? Well, they used to take corrugated brown paper or cardboard, wrap it around the bottle, and put it into a box and ship it that way. And the Newton paper would make that kind of thing. And I told you other products they made wrapping paper for consumers for gifts, and they made a lot of. Their biggest product was carpet lining, where they'd line the carpets. Now, one I haven't mentioned yet is think of when you're putting a new roof on, and you have these shingles you're putting on. But first, you want to put down some black tar paper. Well, they made that too. All right, so that was wrapping paper, and you could put down. So they needed the production of that. They had to put oil inside of the tar paper to make it tar paper. Right? Lots of products. Now think of this one. When insulation started becoming a requirement in houses, they made the outer paper for the insulation. That's rolled up paper. So they made all these kind of products.
And so, what has become of the mill?
It's mostly become the Sunoco Paper Company, and you spell that Sunuco, and that's a paper company that recycles paper. It comes in raw from their consumers, and they recycle it back, and they mostly make materials that are for shipping fragile items, such as the container that might hold a wine bottle and a cradle of cardboard. And so they're kind of doing the same thing that the Newton factory did, except they're not actually making the paper, they're just recycling from it. And then they're making it into a product that the Newton brothers made there 120 years ago. So thank you very much for listening to this podcast.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours. And I want to thank our listeners again for tuning in. And you can also tune into a large selection of our other podcasts.